Move back, King Elias Mercer said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the courtyard. Because if those pups chose her, then somebody in this pack has been lying to me. The whole front terrace went silent. 7 wolf pups, mud on their paws, fur puffed up from the cold, eyes wide with panic, had just sprinted past 2 guards, a beta advisor, and half the royal pack like they were being chased by ghosts. They stopped at the feet of Mara Bennett, a rejected Omega in a faded gray coat, and pressed themselves against her legs like they had finally found home. A few nobles actually laughed. Someone behind Elias muttered, "That's the Ashwell line for you." Even the pups know better than to trust an Omega with no rank. Mara's face went pale, but she did not step back. She crouched slowly, one hand resting on the stone, the other hovering near the smallest pup as if asking permission instead of taking it. "Easy," she whispered. "You're safe now." The smallest one let out a shaky sound and buried its head against her sleeve. Another pup climbed right onto her boot and refused to move. Elias felt it then, a sudden, clean pull under his ribs, like a thread snapping tight. Not pain, recognition. His wolf lifted its head inside him so fast he nearly stiffened in front of the whole pack. That was impossible. Elias kept his jaw locked and looked down at Mara, really looked at her for the first time. She was not pretty in the polished, court-approved way the nobles liked. Her hair had escaped its pin. Her hands were rough from work. There was dried rain at the hem of her coat and a tiny tear at one cuff. But her scent, soft cedar, warm linen, something steady and unafraid, hit him like a memory he had never lived. Mara glanced up, and for one impossible second their eyes held. Elias felt the mate bond flicker, faint but unmistakable, like a spark in a dark room. His wolf went still. The courtyard did not. "Alpha King," Lord Vale said from the steps, voice full of practiced respect and barely hidden amusement. "Shall we remove her?" Mara stood too quickly, color rising in her cheeks. "No," she said before Elias could answer, and the word came out clearer than she meant it to. A few heads turned. She swallowed once, then lifted her chin. "I didn't call them. They ran to me." "That much is obvious," one noblewoman said. "The question is why." Mara's mouth tightened, but she did not look away. Maybe because they were frightened. Elias heard the answer in her voice before he heard the words. She knew something, not a little something, something the royal court would not like. He took one step forward, and every guard in the courtyard straightened. "Take the pups inside," he said quietly. "Then, tomorrow you. Stay where I can see you." The smallest pup whined and hooked one claw into her sleeve. Mara looked down, then back at him. "Your Majesty," she said, careful and controlled. "If those pups are in danger, you should stop asking the wrong questions." Elias felt the courtyard tighten around him. There it was again, that pull in his chest, that impossible sense that the pack had just placed him in front of a truth he was not ready to face. And somewhere deep inside the castle, behind locked doors and royal seals, something old and secret had just started to wake. By the time the courtyard emptied, Mara had already become a problem no one wanted to name out loud. Elias walked her past the second archway himself, not because he trusted the court to handle her, but because he did not trust his own pack to stop staring. The pups had been carried inside first, though not quietly. One of them kept looking back over his handler's shoulder like he expected Mara to disappear if he blinked. That alone was enough to make Elias's wolf pace under his skin. "You can let go of my sleeve now," Mara said softly, without looking at him. Elias realized he had been guiding her by the elbow, not quite touching, just close enough to feel the heat of her through the fabric. He stepped back at once. "I was not holding your sleeve." She gave him a tired look that said she was not nearly as impressed by royal pride as the rest of the kingdom was. "Of course not, Your Majesty." He almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he led her into the side corridor off the West Hall, where the stone walls held the morning cold and the portraits of old kings watched like they were taking notes. "Those pups," he said, "were not wandering by chance." Mara folded her hands in front of her and looked straight ahead. "No, then explain it." "I would rather explain it to someone who does not speak to me like I am standing in front of a tribunal." Elias stopped walking. So did she. For a moment the only sound was the distant echo of footsteps from the main hall and the faint rustle of a banner moving in the draft. "You were just in front of my entire pack," he said. "That was not a tribunal?" "Fair enough." She tipped her chin toward a narrow window. Gray daylight spilled across her face, and for one strange second Elias had the urge to close his hand over the light, as if that might keep her from being taken from him by the shape of the world. The thought unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "The pups have been coming to me for weeks," Mara said finally. "Lost once. 2 from the east fence. 1 from the old stables. Another that came in with a torn paw and a collar no one admitted to owning." Elias watched her carefully. "And you never reported this?" "To whom?" she asked. "The guards who ignored me in the market? The kennel master who called me a nuisance? The council member who thinks an Omega should keep her head down and her mouth shut?" Her voice stayed even, but something in it hardened. "I kept them fed, warm, quiet. That was enough." Elias felt the truth in his chest before he understood it. The bond had not drawn the pups to her by accident. It had recognized something the court had missed. Mara was not just kind. She was doing something dangerous in plain sight. "Why hide them?" he asked. Mara finally looked at him then, and there was no fear in her eyes. Only caution. "Because somebody in this castle does not want the lost pups found." Elias's jaw tightened. "That is a serious accusation. So is letting children vanish and calling it order." The words landed hard. He looked at her for a long second, then turned his head toward the corridor behind him. 2 guards had just appeared at the far end, pretending not to listen. Elias did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Leave us." The guards moved. Mara exhaled slowly, like she had been holding her breath since the moment the pups ran to her. "You believe me," Elias said. It was not a question. She hesitated. "I believe you have enough sense to know when something is wrong." He nodded once, more to himself than to her. That was the first honest answer anyone had given him all morning. And the worst part was that the mate bond inside him had already started treating her as if she belonged in the center of every answer that mattered. The west corridor ended at a narrow set of double doors that had no business being important, which was usually how Elias knew they were important. He led Mara there without announcing it, and she noticed at once. "This is not the public archive," she said. "No," Elias answered. "It is where people put things they want forgotten." Mara stopped beside the door and looked at him sideways. "That is a very royal way to say secret." Elias reached for the brass handle. The moment his fingers touched it, his wolf went sharp inside him. Not alarm. Recognition. The same pull he had felt in the courtyard. Behind these doors, something tied to the pups had already been there before Mara ever arrived. "You knew," she said quietly. "About what?" "About this place." He looked at her, then back at the door. "I knew the room existed. I did not know why it mattered." "That is almost the same thing," Mara said. "It is not. In a castle like this, it usually is." Elias pushed the doors open. The room beyond was colder than the corridor, lined with cedar shelves, locked trunks, and old ledgers stacked in neat rows. A single high window let in a pale strip of afternoon light. On a table near the back sat 3 tiny wolf collars, each one tagged with a number and no name. Mara went still. Elias saw the change in her face before she spoke. "Those are not the pups from this morning," she said. Elias crossed the room in 2 steps. The tags had dates. Some were recent. Some were not. One had been scratched so hard the brass was nearly split. He picked it up, then looked at the ledger beneath it. The entries were careful, official, and wrong. "Transferred," he read aloud. "Assessment complete. Reassignment pending." Mara let out a small breath that sounded almost like a laugh, except there was no humor in it. "That is what they call it when they do not want a paper trail." Elias looked up at her. "You know this language." "I know what it means when the people with power decide a pup is easier to move than to explain." The room seemed to tighten around that sentence. Elias turned another page. Then another. More collars. More numbers. More notes written in the kind of neat hand that tried to sound innocent. His chest went hard. "How long have you known?" he asked. Mara's eyes stayed on the ledger. Long enough to stop expecting anyone to ask. Elias did not answer right away. The mate bond between them flickered, low and uneasy, like it was waiting for him to choose something. He had spent years believing royal duty meant keeping the pack orderly, controlled, and safe. Yet here was a room full of missing names tucked behind a locked door no one mentioned in daylight. "Why did you bring the pups to me?" he asked. "I did not bring them," Mara said. "They came because they were scared." "Scared of what?" Mara finally looked at him, and this time the caution in her face was joined by something else. "Of being sent back." Elias felt the blood drain from his focus. He turned one more page in the ledger and saw the pattern all at once. The pups were not just lost. They were being moved. Quietly. Repeatedly. Someone is taking them, he said. Mara did not deny it. Not physically, she said. Not always. But names disappear. Records change. Kinship gets questioned. A pup is called difficult, then unstable, then unfit to stay where they were born. By the time anyone asks why, it is already too late. Elias stared at the page until the words blurred. Then he shut the ledger with a flat, controlled motion that said more than a shout ever could. Who showed you this? Mara's voice went very soft. Nobody did. I found it by accident. The silence after that was heavy enough to stand in. Elias looked at her and understood something he had not wanted to understand. She had not just been caring for pups. She had been watching a lie from the inside. And if she was right, then the castle had already been breaking its own children long before she ever walked through the gates. By the time Elias closed the ledger, the room felt smaller than before. Not because the walls had moved, but because the truth had. Mara stood near the shelves with her arms folded, quiet now in the way people get when they have already said the dangerous part out loud and do not want to say it again. Elias looked from the collar tags to her face, and then back to the ledgers. You were right, he said. Mara did not look pleased. I know. That almost made him smile, but the weight in his chest would not let him keep it for long. He set the ledger down carefully, like rough handling might somehow make the numbers worse. How many pups? He asked. Mara exhaled through her nose. That I know of. 9. Maybe more. Elias went still. More. These are only the ones I could keep track of once they started moving records around. She gestured at the shelves. A pack does not have to shout to lose someone. It just has to stop writing their name where people can see it. Elias stared at her for a long second. The line landed hard because it sounded like something an old king might have said after a war, except it came from a woman in a worn coat with mud on the hem of her sleeve. His wolf pushed against him again, low and restless, not angry now, just focused. Protective. Too focused. Show me everything, he said. Mara blinked. Everything. Every pup. Every note. Every place they were supposed to go. She gave him a look that was halfway between disbelief and caution. You are asking that like you expect the answer to be tidy. I stopped expecting that an hour ago. She let that sit for a beat, then walked to the far corner of the room. Elias followed. Behind 2 stacked trunks and a tall cabinet with cracked brass hinges was a narrow side door he would have missed if she had not pointed at it. This is what I found first, she said. It connects to the old storage passage below the east wing. Elias frowned. There is a passage under the east wing. Mara looked at him. There is a passage under half this castle. You people just call it heritage when you do not want to admit you forgot where the keys are. Elias let out a breath that might have been a laugh if he had more patience left in his body. She pushed the door open. Warm air drifted out. Not the cold of the archive, but a softer smell. Blankets. Milk. Clean straw. Elias stepped through and stopped. The room beyond was not large, but it had been turned into a hidden nursery in plain sight. Low cots lined one wall. A basket of toys sat near a hearth. Folded blankets. Little bowls. A scratched wooden rocking chair. On the far side, 3 wolf pups lifted their heads at once. One of them gave a tiny bark of recognition and scrambled to its feet, so fast it nearly tipped over. Mara's face changed. Not soft exactly. More steady. Like this was the part of the world she understood best. I did not take them, she said quietly, already answering a question no one had asked. They were left here. Elias looked at the pups, then at the blankets, then back at her. And you stayed. Someone had to. One of the pups trotted straight to her and bumped its nose against her ankle. Mara crouched, rubbed behind its ears, and the little thing melted against her hand like it had been waiting all day for that exact touch. Elias felt it again, that tight, impossible pull in his chest. Not just mate bond. Something sharper. Something older. As if his wolf had already decided this room belonged to her before his mind could catch up. He looked at the nursery, then at the hidden passage, then at Mara kneeling on the floor with a pup pressed to her knee. And he understood, with a kind of cold clarity, that this was no accident. Someone had built a quiet place for the lost, and then abandoned it to people like her. You have been doing all of this alone, he said. Mara did not look up. Not anymore. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hidden nursery felt warm in a way the rest of the castle never did. It was the kind of quiet that only happened when people had stopped pretending nothing was wrong. Mara was still crouched on the floor with a pup tucked against her knee, and Elias could not stop looking at her hands. Not because they were delicate, because they were careful. Every touch was measured, gentle, certain. The pups trusted her without thinking. Elias found himself wishing, with more force than he liked, that he could be trusted that easily. "You built this place into something real," he said. Mara looked up at him. It was already real. It was just hidden. Elias nodded once. That answer stayed with him. Hidden did not mean safe. Hidden usually meant forgotten. One of the pups gave a tiny yawn and rolled onto its back, exposing its belly like it had never known a bad day in its life. Mara gave a soft laugh under her breath and scratched under its chin. Elias heard the sound and felt something inside him shift, low and unfamiliar. His wolf settled at once, like it had been waiting for that sound all along. Mara noticed him watching. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. That is not a real answer." He crossed his arms. "Then consider it a royal answer." That got the smallest smile out of her, quick and unwilling. Elias felt the expression more than he saw it. It did something unhelpful to his chest. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. Mara glanced at the blankets, the bowls, the little scratched toys. "Long enough to get used to sleeping in shifts." Elias looked at the cot nearest the hearth. "You stayed here overnight?" "When they were too young to be alone." "And no one in this castle noticed?" Mara gave him a flat look. "Do you notice the people who polish the floor under your study table?" He had to admit she had a point. "I notice enough." "Clearly not." Elias almost answered sharply, but the pups chose that moment to pile together in a fuzzy knot around Mara's boots, and whatever he had been about to say died on his tongue. One of them nosed at her sleeve until she reached down and lifted it into her lap. The pup immediately settled there like it had paid rent. "They do that a lot," Elias said. "What?" "Choose you." Mara kept her gaze on the pup. "Maybe because I do not ask them to prove anything first." That hit harder than he expected. He thought of court, of ranks, of the careful distance everyone kept around him as if closeness were a risk assessment. He thought of how quickly the pack had looked at Mara and decided she must be less than them. Yet here, in a room no one was supposed to know existed, the pups had already made their decision. Elias stepped closer before he could talk himself out of it. The air between them changed. Mara looked up again, and this time she did not seem surprised to find him near. "You should not be here alone anymore," he said quietly. Mara studied him for a long second. "That depends on whether you are offering help or supervision." "Does it matter?" "Yes." Her answer came instantly. Elias looked at her, then at the pups, then back again. He did not usually make promises lightly, but this one came out before he could shape it into something safer. "Then I am offering both." Mara held his gaze, and for one suspended beat, the mate bond between them pulsed again, faint but undeniable, like the room itself had recognized the shape of their future before either of them was ready to name it. And somewhere beyond the hidden nursery door, footsteps moved through the castle above them, too measured to be casual. Elias went still. Mara noticed at once. "What is it?" she whispered. He listened. The steps stopped. Then, after a pause, the handle on the outer door turned. The handle turned again, slower this time, and every pup in the nursery went still at once. Mara rose halfway to her feet, one hand hovering over the nearest little wolf as if she could keep the whole room quiet by instinct alone. Elias did not move from the doorway. He only set one hand lightly against the frame, blocking the entrance without looking like he was doing it. The door opened to reveal Lord Vale, dressed too neatly for this hour, with 2 guards behind him and the kind of calm expression people wore when they had already decided they were right. "Your Majesty," he said, looking past Elias and straight into the nursery. "I was informed there was unauthorized activity below the east wing." Mara's face went blank in a way that told Elias she had gone straight from startled to guarded. The smallest pup pressed into her boot. Elias's voice stayed even. "Who informed you?" Lord Vale smiled a little. "That seems less important than the fact that this room should not exist." Elias did not glance back. He could feel Mara behind him, tense but silent, and that alone made his jaw lock harder. "And yet," he said, "here it is." Lord Vale stepped into the threshold as if he owned it. His gaze swept over the blankets, the bowls, the toys, the pups, and then settled on Mara with thin amusement. A rejected Omega hiding lost pups in a secret nursery. That is not a small thing, my queen. The word landed wrong. Not because he called her that, but because he said it like a weapon. Mara did not flinch. I am not your queen. Not yet, Lord Vale said. Then he looked at Elias. Unless His Majesty plans to explain why royal records have been altered. Elias felt the room sharpen. Explain. Lord Vale reached into his coat and drew out a brass collar tag. One of the tags from the archive. Elias recognized the number immediately. Mara did too. Her eyes narrowed. That belongs to a pup that was here 3 nights ago. Lord Vale held the tag between 2 fingers. Interesting that you know that. Elias looked from the tag to the man's face. Where did you get it? From the records office. You mean you took it? Lord Vale's mouth tightened, just enough to show the first crack in his composure. I mean, I did my job when someone else clearly was not doing hers. Mara let out a small, sharp breath. You moved them. Lord Vale gave her a cold look. I reassigned unstable pups to proper supervision. That is not supervision, Mara said. That is disappearance with better paperwork. The pups began to whine softly, one after another, sensing the shift in the room. Elias felt something in his chest turn hard and bright. He had trusted Lord Vale with the council schedules, the nursery inspections, the ledgers. Enough trust to become dangerous. How many, he asked. Lord Vale did not answer right away. That silence told Elias enough. How many pups did you move? He repeated, quieter this time. Lord Vale drew himself up. For the stability of the pack, Your Majesty. Elias stared at him. Do not hide behind duty when you are hiding children. The words hit like a blade with no blood and all truth. Lord Vale looked offended now, which only made him more obvious. Mara stepped forward for the first time, her voice low and shaking with controlled anger. They were calling them difficult before they were calling them missing. You knew exactly what you were doing. Elias turned and looked at her, really looked at her. The hurt in her face was worse than the accusation. It was personal now. She had opened her life to this room, and someone from inside his own court had tried to turn it into evidence against her. His wolf rose inside him, not wild, just certain. Elias held out his hand. The tag, he said. Lord Vale did not move. Your Majesty, this is a mistake. Elias's eyes went cold. No, it is a pattern. For a long second, no one breathed. Then Lord Vale slowly placed the tag in Elias's hand, and the nursery went so quiet that even the smallest pup seemed afraid to make a sound. Elias closed his fingers around the brass. He had believed order protected the pack. Now he could feel how easily order became a lie when the wrong people were allowed to define it. Elias did not move for a full second after the tag left Lord Vale's hand. Then he closed his fist around it and turned toward the nursery door. Take the pups upstairs, he said quietly. Mara blinked at him. What? Now? She looked ready to argue, but one glance at his face changed her mind. One of the guards shifted in the doorway. Elias heard it and lifted his eyes. You too, he said. Unless you would like to explain to the council why you were standing in a hidden nursery while royal records were being stolen. That sent the guards moving fast. Lord Vale straightened his sleeves, trying to recover dignity like it was a jacket he could still put on. Your Majesty, this is not something to do in anger. Elias gave him a flat look. No, it is something to do in public. The words hit Mara hard enough that she looked up at him from the pups she had been gathering into the crook of her arms. For a beat, something unreadable passed between them. Not relief. Not yet. Something closer to shock. He had just chosen not to bury it. That mattered. By noon, the pack hall was full. Not crowded in the casual way. Full in the way a room gets when important people sense a storm and come to watch where it lands. Council members lined the upper steps. Guards stood at the walls. Several noble families had arrived without invitation, which meant the rumor had already outrun the truth. Mara stood near the base of the room with the smallest pup pressed against her knee. Elias had placed her there himself, not as a display, but because he wanted every eye in the hall to see exactly who was being judged and who had earned the right to stand still. Lord Vale stood on the raised platform beside the council bench, his face carefully arranged. There has been confusion, he said, voice carrying cleanly over the room. A staff misunderstanding involving missing pups, and an Omega who inserted herself into a matter above her station. A few people murmured. Elias heard one elder snort softly, which meant they had already chosen a side and were just waiting to enjoy it. Elias stepped forward before Vale could continue. No, he said. The hall quieted at once. He held up the brass tag. There has been theft. There has been false record keeping. And there has been a lie built so carefully that some of you began calling it order. That made the room go still in a different way. Vale's jaw flexed once. Your Majesty, with respect, the records show reassignment for unstable pups. Elias turned to face him fully. Then explain why the same pups keep showing up in a hidden nursery under the east wing. A few heads snapped toward Mara. She did not shrink. She only tightened her hold on the little wolf at her side. Explain why her name appears nowhere in the feeding logs, and yet those pups know her scent better than they know yours. The hall shifted. Elias saw it happen. That thin crack in certainty. Vale tried to speak, but Elias kept going. Explain why a rejected Omega was the one who noticed the disappearances. Explain why no one else in this castle thought to ask where the lost pups went. Mara's breath caught, small but audible in the sudden silence. Elias felt the mate bond between them answer like a pulse under his ribs. He did not look at her yet. He wanted the room to hear this first. She did not create this problem, he said. She found it. She protected the pups you ignored. And if any of you think that makes her less than this pack, then you have already forgotten what kind of people you are supposed to be. No one moved. Not even Lord Vale. Then one of the pups broke the silence by trotting forward, planting both paws against Mara's boot, and barking once at the council platform like it had just delivered its own verdict. The hall stayed frozen for a long beat after the pup barked at the council platform. Then the room started to breathe again, all at once, like everyone had forgotten how silence worked. Lord Vale looked around the hall and seemed to realize, too late, that the story he had prepared was falling apart in public. Your Majesty, he said carefully, this is becoming theatrical. Elias did not even glance at him. He was watching Mara, not because she was weak, because she had gone very still. The kind of still that happens when somebody has spent too long being made the problem and is finally deciding whether to believe the truth or brace for the next lie. Elias felt that in his chest and hated it. Take him to the side chamber, he said to the guards. Lord Vale's eyes widened. On what grounds? On the grounds that I asked. The guards moved. The hall shifted again, but no one spoke against him this time. Not when the pups were still clustered around Mara like she had become their only safe place. Not when the brass tag was still in Elias's hand. Not when everybody could see that the king was no longer pretending this was a misunderstanding. In the side chamber, the air felt thinner. 2 council members stood along the wall. Mara stayed near the door until Elias nodded once, and the smallest pup, who had followed her in without permission, curled around her boots and refused to leave. Lord Vale stood in the center of the room with all the patience of a man who had never once expected consequences. Elias set the tag on the table. Start talking, he said. Vale gave a small, bitter smile. About what? Protecting the pack? Keeping difficult pups out of unstable homes. Mara let out a short, disbelieving breath. You call them unstable when they are frightened. I call them what they become when no one can manage them. Elias's voice went quiet. You moved them. Vale spread his hands. I relocated them. To where? Elias asked. Vale hesitated, and that was enough. Mara stepped forward before she could stop herself. To the lower kennels, she said. And if they were not compliant there, they were sent farther out. I found one collar tag in the supply room. The ink was still wet. One of the council members frowned. Did you see this yourself? Yes, Mara said. Her voice did not shake. I saw enough. Elias looked at her, and something inside him tightened with respect that went deeper than attraction, deeper than the bond. She had every reason to shrink in this room. She did not. Lord Vale turned toward her. You should be careful with accusations. Mara met his stare without blinking. You should have been careful with children. That landed harder than Elias's anger ever could. Vale's face changed, just a little. Not guilt. Not yet. Something uglier. Resentment, maybe. The look of a man who had always believed the system would protect him until the wrong person started noticing details. Elias saw it and felt the final piece click into place. This had never been about order. It had been about control. He leaned forward slightly. How many? Vale said nothing. How many pups were moved? Elias repeated. Speak plainly. The silence stretched. Then Vale looked at the floor. Enough to keep the West records clean. Mara closed her eyes for 1 second, and Elias hated the fact that he knew what that silence cost her. When she opened them again, there was something steadier there. Not forgiveness. Not for him. Just clarity. Elias turned toward the council members. From this moment on, every relocation record will be opened. Every collar tag will be matched. Every pup will be accounted for. He paused, then added, and Mara Bennett will be the one overseeing the nursery records until I say otherwise. The room reacted at once. A few gasps. A few looks. One council elder actually nodded, which Elias counted as a minor miracle. Mara stared at him. You are putting me in charge? No, he said. I am putting the truth where it belongs. For the first time all day, something in her face eased. Just a little. Not enough to call it trust. Enough to call it a start. And when the pups pressed closer to her boots, Elias did not stop them. He only stood beside her and let the room understand, finally, who the pack had already chosen. By sunset, the castle felt different. Not fixed, not healed, but honest in a way it had not been in years. The nursery records were already being pulled apart line by line, and the first corrected collar tags had been laid out on a long table in the East Hall, like proof that the truth could still fit inside a room built for lies. Mara stood beside that table in the same faded coat she had worn that morning, except now the whole pack looked at her differently. Not like she had suddenly become important. More like they had finally learned how much she had been carrying while they were busy looking away. Elias watched her from the far end of the hall and felt the mate bond between them settle into something quieter, deeper, and more real than the sharp pull he had felt in the courtyard. It was not a demand anymore. It was recognition. Lord Vale had been removed from council duty before the hour was out. No shouting, no spectacle, just the kind of punishment that mattered in a place built on reputation. The pups had been returned to proper care, one by one, and every name that had gone missing was being spoken aloud again. Elias had made sure of that. When the last pup in the nursery saw Mara, it ran to her without hesitation and buried its face against her knee. She smiled then, small and tired, and that expression hit him harder than any victory speech ever could. He stepped closer. You were right to keep them safe, he said. Mara did not look away from the pup. I was right because somebody had to be. Elias nodded once. There was no defense for that. Only responsibility. I should have seen it sooner. Mara finally looked up at him, and there was no cruelty in her eyes. Only the kind of calm that comes after disappointment has already done its worst. Yes, she said. You should have. The words did not wound him the way they might have a year ago. They felt clean. Useful. True. Elias took a slow breath. I cannot undo what happened here, he said. But I can decide what happens next. Mara waited. He could feel the whole hall listening. You are not being asked to serve the nursery, he said. You are being asked to lead it. A few heads turned. Someone in the back actually whispered his name like he had lost his mind. Elias did not care. Every lost pup will be tracked. Every transfer will require review. Every record will have a second name on it. Yours. Mara looked at him for a long moment, as if she was trying to decide whether he meant the offer or the apology inside it. Then she gave the smallest nod. I will do it, she said, if the pups stay the priority. Elias almost laughed at the fact that she had to say that out loud. They will. Her gaze held his for one quiet second longer. And the truth? She asked. Elias glanced toward the council table, the tags, the corrected ledgers, the room that had spent too long pretending not to know. The truth stays in the open now. That was when the smallest pup nudged Mara's hand, then toddled straight over to Elias and sat on his boot like it had decided he was not allowed to leave. The whole hall noticed. Even a few guards lowered their eyes to hide their smiles. Elias looked down at the pup, then back at Mara. For the first time in a very long time, he did not feel like a king holding a kingdom together with his bare hands. He felt like a man learning how to deserve what his title was supposed to protect. Mara saw it too. Her expression softened, just enough to matter. Not a promise. Not yet. But something close enough to stay with him. And as the evening light spilled through the high windows, Elias understood the real cost of leadership was not looking strong when everyone was watching. It was choosing the person nobody believed in and making sure the pack never forgot her worth again.